for men were fishing by the river, thinking they had caught a giant fish, but as they pulled it closer, they were horrified to see it was actually a human head that had been floating for who knows how long. And this is the story of a Korean film released in 2007, hailed by many as a masterpiece of mind-bending mystery and suspense. Yet it was banned in multiple countries within just a week of its premiere. On the island, all 15 people perished, each in an unthinkably tragic way. Yet no one could guess who the killer was, until the final scene completely shattered my understanding of humanity, revealing just how easily people can treat life as worthless. The film was based on real events, with layers upon layers of twists that make your mind spin, as if you've watched Triangle all over again. The story begins on a small, isolated island. The island is called Paradise Island, home to 11 permanent residents. But on this particular day, 2 doctors suddenly arrived. They claimed to have been sent by the government to perform health checks for the villagers and brought along various supplies, including dozens of bags of sugar and other goods. One of the doctors was Woo Song, our main character, who had no idea what secrets the island held or why it was called Paradise Island. After distributing all the supplies, Woo Song and his partner decided to stay and live on the island for 2 months. One day, the village chief gathered all the residents to celebrate and thank Woo Song and GWI Nam for their help, as they had now earned everyone's trust. During the meal, a man named Chun Bei suddenly told Woo Song that he had seen the portrait on the island move. The eyes in the painting had come to life. Woo Song, who had been drinking quite a bit, quickly pulled out his flashlight to check Chun Bei's eyes, wondering if something was wrong with his vision. After a quick look, he said there was nothing unusual, probably just fatigue or an illusion from lack of sleep. Chun Bei seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, but with a nervous smile, he still insisted that he really saw the eyes in the painting move. Woo Song just smiled back and said nothing more. As the night wore on and the drinks kept flowing, everyone on the island soon fell asleep under the dark sky. Meanwhile, 2 workers began wandering around aimlessly. When they saw Deok-ju, the simple-minded man who carried water for a living, they decided to take advantage of him. They knew he had been saving money for years, so they convinced him to join them in a card game, planning to win all his money. The 3 of them headed to a small, hidden temple, not realizing that a young boy named Tae-ji had seen everything. In Tae-ji's eyes, gamblers were nothing but parasites destroying the peace of the island. But just as he muttered those words, he felt a cold gust of wind behind him and, terrified, ran straight home. Moments after he left, one of the men stumbled out of the temple, covered in blood, clutching his neck. He collapsed before he could get far and was dragged away by a shadowy figure. Elsewhere, Woo Song was sound asleep when a man named Sun-gu knocked on his door and woke him up. When Woo Song arrived at the scene, he saw the 2 workers dead, their bodies twisted together in a horrifying way, so mangled that no one could tell whose limbs were whose. Woo Song seemed to realize something and quickly went to the rooftop, where Sun-gu and Chun Bei were.
들어가는 사람들 봤다고 그랬지?
예.
누구였어?
그랑께 그것이 저거 있는 기사님들 빼고 나머지 기사님들하고라.
덕수!
예.
When the others heard that Deok-ju's name was mentioned, they were terrified and hurried upstairs. Then Pan-su, Sun-gu's father, spoke up, claiming he had seen Deok-ju the previous night. He said he had woken up to find Deok-ju standing at the foot of his bed, holding a large amount of money and saying he wanted to take Young to the mainland. Before throwing the cash on the floor and walking out with Bong-soon in his arms, Pan-su, knowing that Deok-ju was a bit slow, tricked him with an excuse and sent him away. Deok-ju left reluctantly and disappeared into the thick fog. Everyone listened in confusion, not sure what to believe, and Woo Song suggested calling the police, but the village chief insisted they should find Deok-ju first. So everyone began arguing about what to do, fearing that if Deok-ju was still on the island, no one would be safe. In the end, they agreed to search for him together, while Woo Song returned to the crime scene to look for clues. All he found were scattered playing cards, torn bills, and bloody handprints on the window. There was no clear evidence pointing to what had happened. The villagers started beating drums and searching the island, calling out Deok-ju's name, but such a loud search could easily alert him. So one man suggested splitting into 2 groups. Woo Song and Chun Bei decided to search the caves. As they walked, Chun Bei began to analyze the situation. saying Diakju must have killed the two men out of anger after losing money, since he needed cash to get Bongsun back. He spoke so confidently, as if he were Diakju himself. Then Wusong suddenly heard a strange sound, and Chunbei seemed to fall into a trance, walking forward as if hypnotized.
괜찮아요?
잘 자는데요. 선생님 챙겨준 약이 죽방이요.
Seeing he was fine, Wusong followed him deeper into the cave. They reached a locked entrance, where Chunbei stopped and said that inside was a cursed woman who had died there, warning that anyone who stayed too long would be cursed too. As Chunbei left, Wusong decided to follow and leave the place behind. Meanwhile, another engineer named Zhou, who was searching near the coast, discovered his shoe floating on the surface of the water. He reached out to grab it, but before he could pull it up, he slipped and fell into the sea. When he looked up, he saw something on a nearby rock, a knife and another shoe placed neatly beside it. The discovery led the village chief to call everyone for a meeting. He was convinced that Diakju had killed the man and then taken his own life. They planned to alert the authorities, but the radio was broken, so someone would need to travel to the mainland the next day to report the case. The chief looked toward Pansu, clearly implying he should go, but Pansu refused, saying a patrol boat would arrive in 2 days anyway and that the days of madness were approaching. Zhou, who was new to the island, asked what that meant. A monk named Yangbong explained that once every year, the fog surrounding the island grows unusually thick, making everything glow with an almost heavenly light, and that's how the island came to be called Paradise Island. The chief told everyone to rest and wait for the patrol boat, but GWI Nam stood up and said there might be another murder. He questioned how Diakju's knife and shoes could have been placed so neatly. It was obvious someone had killed him and arranged the scene on purpose. No killer would ever leave the weapon out in plain sight. That meant someone among them was the true culprit. Everyone froze in fear, realizing the killer could be sitting right beside them. The meeting erupted into chaos. Wusong then spoke up, saying that if he were the killer, he would have already fled the island instead of pretending to be calm here. He believed Diakju had taken his own life. GWI Nam disagreed but couldn't win the argument, so after everyone left, she privately met with Wusong again, insisting that there must be another killer. To her surprise, Wusong agreed, explaining that he had called it a suicide earlier only to prevent panic. He knew that if suspicion spread, chaos would follow and that the killer was definitely among them. GWI Nam understood and asked Wusong to help her catch the culprit, but Wusong simply said he would handle it himself, leaving her puzzled. What neither of them realized was that someone outside had overheard their conversation. The next morning, Wusong was summoned by that same man, who demanded to know what he had been doing that night. Wusong said he had been asleep, but the man didn't believe him, pointing out that Wusong had told everyone it was a suicide, yet secretly told GWI Nam it was a murder, a clear contradiction. He accused Wusong of hiding something and decided to tie him up. GWI Nam quickly stepped forward to defend Wusong, and others joined in, saying he was innocent. But the man, who was the island's only security officer and the chief's son, silenced them all. He said if they locked Wusong up and another murder still happened, that would prove Wusong's innocence and they would release him. That night, thick fog rolled across the island, covering everything in ghostly silence. Chunbei sat at home, playing word games. When he realized one of his sketchbooks was missing, he went to the classroom to find it and was surprised to see GWI Nam still there, working late. He greeted her casually, not sensing anything strange, and took the sketchbook home. He then took out some of the sugar Wusong had given them to feed his sheep and sat down to draw. But when he opened the sketchbook, he found a note inside that read, "The chief brought something he shouldn't have." The message left him deeply unsettled. Then he heard a noise outside. He called out twice, but no one answered, until he saw a woman crouched by his sheep pen, eating the animal feed while mumbling that she was starving. Moments later, Chunbei fainted from shock and was carried to Wusong's place. The villagers claimed he had seen the ghost of the woman from the cave. Thankfully, after emergency treatment, Chunbei survived. Pansu, looking nervous, whispered to Wusong that what happened reminded him of his own dream about Diakju, where he saw him throwing money on the floor, but when he woke up and went to look, the money was gone, leaving him uneasy as he walked away. Hearing this, Wusong felt speechless. That night, as he lay in bed, he suddenly noticed Chun-Bei standing behind him like a ghost. Chun-Bei said he had something to show him, and when he took it out, it turned out to be that same note. Wu Song looked at the words on it. The chief brought something he shouldn't have. Beside him, Chun-Bei seemed possessed, desperately curious about what exactly the chief had brought and whether it could be some kind of weapon to deal with the killer. Wu Song asked him why he would think that, but Chun-Bei said he didn't know either, that his mind lately felt strange, as if something had taken root in his head, filling it with odd and chaotic thoughts. Wu Song, who seemed to understand Chun-Bei's condition well, gently asked if he often saw hallucinations or felt restless inside, and Chun-Bei nodded, admitting that he did. As time went by, something strange happened at the chief's house. A man dressed in black sneaked in and started searching through the room. Before long, he found a large stash of cash hidden inside a wall pouch. But just then, the chief woke up.
왜? 내가 사람 죽이고 나머지 판돈이라도 챙겼을까봐? 왕년의 화토면 네 아니었나? 네 땜신 나만 손가락 잘리고 말이야. 에? 아버지야! 저거 사람 먹었어요!
Now everyone on the island believed Yongbon was the killer, but during the attempt to catch him, one of the chief's sons was accidentally slashed across the throat and died instantly, while Yongbon escaped. However, as he tried to escape, he ran into another man, Yongbon himself, which meant that no one ever discovered the true identity of the masked intruder. Yongbon tried to threaten the black-clad man into dropping his knife, but when he looked toward a nearby rooftop, he saw what appeared to be a ghostly figure. Terrified, Yongbon panicked, and the intruder seized the chance to escape. Yongbon chased after him but was killed when they turned a corner. Meanwhile, the young boy Taiji was on his way home when the dying Yongbon, covered in blood, grabbed his leg and begged him to get help, but Taiji fainted from fright, and Yongbon died where he lay. Later, Taiji was taken to Wusong's clinic, and Chun-Bei went to find Zhou to tell him about the note. Together, they began speculating that perhaps the village chief had been gambling too, and after losing everything, he brought something dangerous to the island, which eventually led to the murders. Zhou and the others agreed that Chun-Bei's reasoning made sense, but before they could discuss further, Taiji's mother screamed her son was missing. Everyone rushed out to search and soon spotted Taiji standing on a cliff's edge. Wu Song tried to bring him back, but as he approached, Taiji looked terrified, as if seeing something horrifying, and suddenly fell into the sea. The crowd panicked and jumped in to search for him, but after a long time, they only found one of his shoes. Now convinced that the chief had brought something cursed to the island, Taiji's mother, Zhou, and several others began searching the chief's house for answers. It didn't take long before Chun-Bei found the stash of money hidden inside. The villagers demanded the chief explain himself, but he stood speechless, unable to justify it. One of his sons then stepped forward holding Yongbon's gun. The group immediately recognized the weapon and the gambling money, and they were certain the chief's family must be behind the killings. The chief and his son, however, denied everything. One of the men stepped forward, demanding to know exactly what forbidden thing the chief had brought to the island. The chief replied that he had shared everything. He brought rice and food with the villagers. The confrontation grew tense, with neither side willing to back down. Fortunately, Wu Song and the others arrived just in time to stop the argument before it got worse. But the moment Wu Song finished speaking, Pansu suddenly lunged forward, trying to grab the gun from the village chief's son. The gun went off in the struggle, and Pansu was shot. He clutched his stomach, staggered toward his wife, and collapsed in her arms. Everyone stood frozen in shock. Zhou tried to seize the gun again, but Wu Song, desperate to prevent another tragedy, threw it away only for it to land right at Chun-Bei's feet.
아씨, 총 내려놓으세요.
The entire room went silent. They weren't afraid of a sane man holding a gun, but a man like Chun-Bei, unstable and unpredictable, was a danger to everyone, because no one could know when he might pull the trigger. The chief's son stepped forward and ordered Chun-Bei to put the gun down, but in his panic, Chun-Bei accidentally stepped on Sun-Bei's body, causing the gun to fire again. When everyone came to their senses, they realized that someone had been hit. Clearly, this terrified Chun-Bei, who grabbed the gun and ran, while Wu Song immediately chased after him. Meanwhile, Zhou and the others confronted the village chief, demanding to know what he had brought to the island. The chief insisted that he hadn't brought anything suspicious and had nothing to do with the money. His accusers didn't believe him and pressed further, asking if he had been gambling. The chief lifted his hand to show 2 missing fingers, saying they had been cut off years ago because of gambling, so why would he ever gamble again? As for the money, he claimed someone had given it to him as advice or repayment, but he had no idea what it really was or what had been brought to the island. The group grew desperate to know the truth. Just as the chief opened his mouth to explain, a sudden gunshot rang out. He had been struck down. It turned out that during the struggle between Wu Song and Chun Bei, the gun had fired again, and by sheer misfortune, the bullet hit the chief. The real cause was that Chun Bei had seen the ghost once more and began shooting wildly. Luckily, Wu Song managed to subdue him and locked him away. Elsewhere, Taiji's mother completely broke down after losing both her husband and son on the same day. Overwhelmed by grief, she began to hallucinate, believing that Taiji had returned. Following Taiji's voice, she walked out of the house and fell into the sea, disappearing forever, though no one on the island yet knew what had happened. Meanwhile, Wu Song went to the cold storage room, staring intently at the bodies lined up before him, as if searching for some hidden truth among them. Inside his cell, Chun Bei overheard Joe and another man talking outside. Still searching for the missing bag of money, he told them he knew where it was. The two followed him to the temple, where he led them to the base of the Buddha statue. To their surprise, they really did find a bag buried beneath the floorboards, but it was not the same one. This one was stained with blood, just like the one Diakju had once carried. As they stared at it in confusion, Chun Bei quietly stepped back behind them. Before they realized what was happening, he grabbed the statue and smashed it down on their heads, over and over, until they collapsed lifeless on the floor. When he turned to leave, he froze. There it was again, the ghost, crouched and gnawing at the bodies. Horrified, Chun Bei let out a piercing scream that echoed across the temple, loud enough for an old man outside to hear. Moments later, that same old man appeared carrying a bucket of gasoline and set the entire temple ablaze. Hearing his voice, Chun Bei's mind snapped. The same phrase he had seen on the note came from the old man's mouth. After setting the fire, the old man tried to escape by boat. Chun Bei, desperate for answers, chased after him, shouting to know what exactly the chief had brought to the island. The question had become his obsession. He couldn't die without knowing. Then he saw a money bag on the old man's boat, and it pushed him completely over the edge. Wu Song arrived and fired a warning shot, interrupting Chun Bei's rage. Startled, Chun Bei grabbed the bag and fled, with Wu Song close behind. They fought their way onto the boat, but soon Chun Bei had nowhere left to run. Wu Song demanded to know why he had killed so many people. By now, all the evidence pointed to him, the black-clad thief, the killer of Joe, the workers, and Diakju. It had always been Chun Bei. He wasn't simple-minded at all, but frighteningly intelligent. In that moment, Chun Bei pretended to weaken, collapsing as if on the verge of death. When Wu Song lowered his guard to check on him, Chun Bei attacked. They fought fiercely, but Wu Song was no match for him. Just as Wu Song was about to be killed, Gwi Nam appeared and fired a shot. Hitting Chun Bei, Wu Song was pulled into the water by a rope attached to the anchor. Gwi Nam rushed forward to help, but Chun Bei, still alive, grabbed her arm. In a frenzy, he shouted that the note she had given him had driven him insane. Demanding to know why she gave it to him, he pulled out the money, saying if she told him the truth, she could have it all. Gwi Nam, terrified, realized he was completely unhinged. She pushed him away and tried to escape, but he came after her again. In panic, she grabbed a flare gun and fired, engulfing him in flames. That was the end of Chun Bei. Now, Gwi Nam was the only living person left on the island. When she returned to Wu Song's office, she found his notebook. Inside, it revealed that he had been part of an experimental project, one involving the sugar they had brought to the island. It was designed to make people feel joy from within and was even said to help with depression. But something went terribly wrong. Those who ate it began suffering from bloodshot eyes, hallucinations, anxiety, and high fevers. Realizing this, GWI Nam finally understood the true source of the madness was the sugar that Wusong had brought. To her shock, Wusong was still alive, only wounded. She confronted him, asking if he had written that note for Chunbei. Wusong then began to explain everything. At first, the sugar worked well. Everyone who ate it showed strange improvements. Even an old man who hadn't spoken for decades suddenly began to talk again. And the first words he spoke were, "The chief brought something he shouldn't have." Wusong didn't care what the words meant. What mattered was that the man spoke. Chunbei, who consumed the most sugar, improved the fastest. He could draw again. He seemed stable, and there were no side effects. But everything changed that night. After losing a large sum of money gambling, Chunbei believed others had tricked him, and in his rage, he killed them all. But was it truly an accident or the effect of the sugar? To find out, Wusong wrote the note to provoke him. That note became the spark for everything that followed. All those so-called ghosts and hallucinations were nothing more than the side effects of the sugar. When he finished explaining, Wusong knocked GWI Nam unconscious, sent her back to the mainland, and chose to stay behind. Alone on the island, he began experimenting on himself as the unknown horror quietly began to take shape.